Walk with me through the cellar door.
A storm is coming, Francis.
A portal to a more skeptical world.
Cellar Door Skeptics begins right now. Prepare for the revolution with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna.
Welcome back to Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you all for joining us in episode 107, A Tale of Two Taxpayers. Tonight, the duo gets to rejoin forces again, and despite all of the craziness in each of our lives, we're able to carve out the next hour just specifically for you. Tonight, we decided we wanted to cover the GOP tax plan. And no, we're not going to cover the whole thing, because that would be a 17-hour show. And if we get past hour 2, usually I'm too drunk to rationally coherent a thought. And the next thing you know, it will just be blackout ramblings between the two of us for 15 hours.
Actually, it'll probably just be you yelling at guns.
yelling about guns. Hey, I did not yell that much about. I was sober when I did that. I'm pretty sure.
I wanted to say something that I really like that segment. It was it was a good one. I really like our deep dive segments that we have here. It's like last episode, I finished my trilogy on CRISPR, and you have done a different topic on each one with either your interviews or whatever. But like, I really do like those short segments and stuff. So anybody listening, if you guys think those are cool, let us know what you thought. Was my science stuff just too bouncing forth back in quotations and all that, or would you like more detail? Would you like more specific numbers? Do you want specificity, or do you like what we got going on there, or you just hate it completely and let's move on to something else? Just give us some feedback and let us know what you think. You could even rate us on iTunes, on Spreaker, on Stitcher, or any of the programs you can find us on, and just let us know there too.
Speaking of which, if you would like to hear pre or post show ramblings, sometimes we test the mic. Sometimes we drink too much before, sometimes we drink too much after. Join our Patreon account, and you will get behind-the-scenes content about how Chris talks about his red pop and vodka that he's drinking.
Absolutely no penis jokes, ever.
But in all fairness, folks, we did switch the segments up a little bit to do more deep divey stuff, and then this whole tax thing has got me going, and I don't know how to explain it other than I was a little bit unimpassioned by politics for a while, and it was more of the social justice stuff or more of the gun things, or I found a friend that came out of the closet as an atheist and is still living with his Christian wife, who very much controls a lot of that relationship. And so there's just so many different things that have come at me that all of a sudden I dove back into politics because of the tax plan. And I don't want to say that because, I don't want to say that because I wasn't paying attention. It was really more just because all of a sudden the tax plan hit me. And I said, okay, let's be fair here. We're skeptics. We're all skeptics in the room. Everybody listening to this podcast is a skeptic. I mean, that's the name of the bloody podcast, for Christ's sake. Let's actually start looking at the GOP plan. Let's look at how it can affect us. And let's, kind of look at retrospective what it's going to do for the next 8 years. Now, we're only going to analyze part of it for tonight. And I'll be honest, I don't know if we're going to get into corporate tax in the future or not. We're not going to touch corporate tax tonight. Because, in all fairness, and I'm not going to say we're not going to do it because corporate tax in America is very high compared to a lot of other countries. We are one of the top countries for corporate tax, flat out. It's a fact. But the reason I don't want to touch it tonight is because I felt that looking at individual income tax is more beneficial. Because a lot of the arguments I'm getting from GOP supporting Republicans, Trump supporting Republicans, and even a few libertarians here and there is the fact that they're saying, hey, look at your taxes. You're going to get more money back. You're going to be influenced on your tax. Yeah, exactly. You're going to be influenced, and why are you complaining about this? Now, anybody that knows me or anybody that had to ever work with me. Not that, I don't know how many people who worked with me listen to the show, but if you know me as an individual, my big thing is I don't look at initial effect. I'm going to look at how does it affect 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now. I look at those things. That's how my mind works. Like, I'm obsessed with some of that stuff in some way, shape, or form because I'm looking at it in the aspect of, okay, yeah, hey, this year, you know what? That's going to be really good. I might get a little bit more money back. Though I'll be honest, when we look at tax brackets, I think my tax bracket and Hannah's tax bracket, we're both kind of screwed in this one. But
well, it's funny that you mentioned the 10-year time period because that's exactly the length of the tax breaks that are going to be happening. And so they're saying at the end of that 10-year period, when $1.5 trillion are added to the deficit under the current plan, $1.7 trillion, I think it is, that everybody's taxes in the middle class are for sure going to go up at that point. So some of the middle class taxes are going to go up a little bit. Most of them are going to kind of hang out where they are, no real changes. And the people at the top are going to get a decent hefty tax break.
Exactly.
But then everybody's is going to have to go up because somebody has to cover that added deficit at the end of that 10-year.
Exactly. And you know, I understand this is multifaceted. And this is one of the things that, you know, we'll be talking about a little bit tonight is we're going to be analyzing how this affects everybody, how it's going to affect the federal government and the income tax they're taking in. Because in fairness, if they're saying, hey, we're going to cut out X amount of millions or billions of dollars a year, how are you going to recoup that? Where are you going to get that from? Well, you know, one of the instances, and I guess I'm jumping ahead here, but one of the instances is they're looking at saying, hey, we're no longer going to force people to pay into Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. And so that's part of in the tax plan. And again, this is not even part of our discussion tonight. This is just a caveat of things that I've been researching. They're going to cut that. That's $338 million, I believe, a year that they're going to say, hey, nobody has to pay into it. Therefore, look at those increases. And what does that do? $338
billion.
Billion. It's billion?
Billion.
Okay, so I'm incorrect.
Yeah.
You have corrected me.
Yeah, but add 3 zeros to that thing. That's a ton of money.
Well, that's huge.
That's a ton of money.
Huge, especially when we look at, in fairness, Hannah, what we're going to look at in a second. I actually went through and ran some numbers on somebody that makes between $40,000 and $60,000 a year in their tax rate, and somebody that's, you know, making over $500,000 a year. And I actually I analyzed and looked at the different numbers. But that's huge, right? We're gonna lose that in mandates. So what does that mean? There's less money coming into the system. You're gonna see an increase in premiums again. So if I ever hear another Republican complain about Obamacare coming up, I'm gonna be like, look, you just voted for the people that are in office that allowed for us to stop paying into it. So you're letting people not buy into this, which is gonna create larger healthcare costs. On top of that, if they do need to go to the emergency room, what are the chances they're gonna pay it? So now I'm gonna say, if you're making $45,000 a year as a family, you know, of 4, and you get to go to the emergency room, and it's going to cost you $2,000, what person making $45,000 a year has $2,000 sitting around and 4 kids? Very few people.
They just don't. And so in the end, what it comes down to, it becomes debt, and then eventually it becomes bankruptcy, and then it becomes money never paid back that's borrowed on. Those types of things are going to be all over the place. We've talked about this multiple times, and this is just something that's lightly tied into the tax plan, is that healthcare costs when you go to the emergency room because of absolute emergency healthcare as opposed to preventative healthcare throughout the whole year having a healthcare plan. It is cheaper to have the mandate and keep people in the system. If you take away the healthcare mandate, the only people that are going to be getting the healthcare through the ACA are going to be people who absolutely have to have it. Cancer, major diseases like diabetes or diabetes, as Wilford Brimley used to say. all of that kind of stuff. I mean, any of those major diseases where it takes regular care, day in, day out, week in, week out, those people are going to be on the ACA because they're going to be looking for the subsidies they're going to be given. But what's going to happen is it creates 2 pools. There's the people who are not going to be in healthcare at all, or 3 pools. People not in healthcare at all, the people who are on the ACA who are sick as heck, and then healthy people who are in the middle class or up a little bit. And the people in the middle class and people in the upper class that are paying for their healthcare, they're going to be basically taking the brunt of all of these costs. because the really sick people are going to be, it's either going to be them paying tons and tons of money or just not having health care. And eventually, what it does, it just drives that income inequality. It drives people further and further out so that poor people don't have health care and people that are well off do. I mean, these are types of things like this tax plan kind of does all of these things. It drives that income inequality further and further out. So we're actually going to talk about these a few times, just like the different kinds of income that people have and how these tax benefits and the stuff that they have in the new plan, how they don't particularly affect people who have lots of money already or are inheriting their money.
Exactly, and that's the big thing here. We posted an Atlantic article about the 7 myths of the GOP tax plan, right? And it's funny because the initial picture is Trump pointing at Merry Christmas. I mean, he's just saying, "Hey, look at me. This is your Christmas present." And I'll be honest, we're going to get into this in a minute, here, where we kind of talk about where standard deductions are changing, how this is changing a little bit, but we aren't even at a solid definition. The Senate passed their version, but they still have to abide by a couple different things. The first is now it's got to go through the House. They've got to agree to it. Chances are they're going to merge their bill with the Senate bill. And in fairness, the House bill benefited individuals more than it actually did the corporate side of things. And that's the funny thing, is that nobody passed the House bill, but all of a sudden the Senate bill passed. Well, there's only a few provisions inside of the Senate bill that were so much better than the House bill. So it's kind of funny that, this is what passed versus the other one. I guess I don't grasp the logic behind what they made the decision on, but that's where it's at. So now they got to come back together now, and they got to put a bill back together to present for the president to sign if it goes through the House.
Yeah, well, the House is typically, that's a 2-year term for everybody in that. That's a short. So like they call it the House like the teenagers of the legislative branch. Like they're in and out, in and out, in and out. And some of them are in there for a long time, but there's a lot of turnover there. So like the people in there think they can change the world in 10 minutes, 15 minutes. The Senate, those people, they're in there for much longer terms, and they're like the slow elderly statesmen or statespersons of the legislature. So like they usually go through things a little bit more. They have a tendency to be a little bit more middle ground and moderate. The House tax plan breaks up the tax brackets into less brackets, so the grouping can be better off for the people at the bottom. But the House plan has some aggressive things that the Senate plan didn't. And then the Senate plan has the healthcare mandate repealed, and the House people didn't put it in there because they were like, there's no way it's going to make it through the Senate with that. Because the House people, they immediately were really, really quickly able to repeal the Affordable Care Act as far as their bill, but the Senate was kind of slow. So like there's a difference between the two places, and when they mesh together, I don't think it's going to be hard for them to find some kind of consensus to send that thing towards the president.
No, and I agree with you on that. I think that's where it's headed. So the point of this starting of the conversation was to talk about tax brackets, right? So there's a lot of bad things inside of there, but I want to talk about individual tax brackets, married people filing jointly, those type of things. I want to look at the actual tax brackets. So the tax brackets that are proposed are slightly different. The House actually proposed only 4. The Senate has stuck with the 7. So let's kind of go through those. So the original tax brackets that we have are 10, 15, 25, 28, 33, 35, and 39.6. The proposed ones are 10, 12, 22, 24, 32, 35, and 38.5. Now,
that's in the Senate.
That's in the Senate, yes. We're going to solely focus on the Senate for this current time frame, right? I'll be honest, a lot of the research I did avoided the House side of things, Hannah.
Well, we knew that basically the Senate has to come through with their plan, and then the House is going to pass whatever the heck, because it's easy for them to get it. They have a much stronger majority. And so we knew that the House was going to be able to pass it. The Senate was going to have a hard time, and then whatever commiseration they can make in between because of their reconciliation program, the budget program that they're doing. So the Senate one was the one everybody was worried about, because same with the healthcare plan, the repeal plan that the House is just willy-nilly when it comes to passing stuff. Paul Ryan has got a
Exactly.
bunch of loonies running around over there.
So the other big change that had happened is that, inside of the tax brackets, the standard deduction for single filers was $6,350. It's now going to be $12,200. Now they are going to eliminate personal exemption taxes. And I'll be honest, I've not had a lot of experience with personal exemption taxes. I don't know if I disagree with that, because under our current plan, you can only deduct $4,050 singly for personalized deductions, which is, again, that you're looking at $2,300 less than you can with a standardized deduction. I've never used an itemized. Yes, I've never used an itemized deduction in my life. I tried 1 year and it just didn't benefit me. And so
you have to have a lot of different kinds of things you put your money into, and you have to have a CPA who writes that nasty mess up, because it's like a hedgehog. So I have a CPA that we use for my company, and I pay him to do mine, and it's just not too much more expensive, or basically break even with going to a tax place around town. But since he knows everything that my company does, it's easy for him to run my stuff through the itemize. And some years the itemize is not worth as much as the standard deduction, and so you kind of put them both up, compare the two, and you pick the one that has the better deal.
Exactly.
But some people, like people with a lot of money, they can do a ton of itemized stuff, and it is much better to do it. You got to keep really good records too. It's tough.
You do. And so the statistics show that 70% of Americans use standard deductions when filing taxes. And I'll be honest, I'm not actually against eliminating, personalized exemptions like that. I don't know if I actually disagree with that personally. So I guess if I have to agree with something the GOP did, I kind of do agree with that, because I don't like that fucked up weird variability that you can get from the itemized deductions. And to me, it almost feels like you're figuring out a way to cheat the system differently. And that's why I'm not really into that.
I think you and I both would not have an issue with simplifying the tax code. The whole idea behind some of the GOP stuff is simplifying it. Put it on a postcard. Okay, I can deal with an 8.5 by 11 sheet. I don't need this this weird postcard shape or something like that. It's like when you get your power bill. It's like this 4.5 inch wide by 36 inch long piece of paper. What am I going to do with that? Put it on an 8.5 by 11 piece of sheet of paper. But either way, this could be the same kind of thing, right? You simplify the tax code so that it doesn't take a law degree to understand how to get the best, the most money for yourself. So the standard deduction is a good way to streamline that.
Exactly. And so again, I don't have a disagreement with it. Now, I don't know if I want to say we should double the standard deduction. I don't know if I want to say that. But that's what they're doing. In the Senate plan, they doubled the deduction almost. It's $12,000 versus $6,350 for single payers. And again, we're going to focus on single payers versus married only because it's smaller numbers. It's easier to talk about. And really, the married one is just a double. It's just a double number. So I'm just going to stick with single file. It'll be a lot easier to have a conversation about it that way. Now,
also, there's one other thing with that. When you're basically talking about the standardized deduction, is it looks great. Okay, we're going to double your standard deduction. We're going to double the amount of money that you can possibly or potentially get back. It looks really good. It's a very easy, quick number to flash around. I mean, that's what they're doing with this. But we'll talk about it a little bit later. Is all of the things that they're removing from the tax plan that takes away from that overall 12. So it's a really great thing to shine at everybody's faces, and whether or not they go in deeper to actually find whether or not it's a better deal or not, it takes a lot more work, which is something that they're kind of counting on, because the American people don't really like to dive deep into the details as far as some people really should.
Exactly. Now, one of the big things to notice is that there's only a slight decrease in the top 1%, we'll just say, right? So
yeah.
If you're making $60,000 a year, you're in literally the way it works out is you are in, I believe, the top 60% of Americans. So only 40% of Americans make more money than you. Now, I'll be honest, that's a sad statistic, really. And I would be interested to actually go into what other countries statistically are. So, if I walked into England and I made 70 grand a year, would I be in the top 60%, or am I going to be in the top 20%? How does that work? And so I would be interested to look into that. We didn't dive into that side of it. I just want to make a blanket statement and say that 60% of Americans fall in this category or below $60,000 a year.
Well, here's an easy one. So the median, basically the middle income. So Germany's 33,000, Netherlands 38,000, Australia 46, Canada 41, U.S. 43, Finland 34, Denmark 44, Luxembourg 52, Sweden 50, and Norway 51. So there's some general ideas around. Those are some of the better ones, obviously.
Okay.
With highest per capita household income.
So there you go. So now, if we look just at the base tax code and we just said, hey, okay, if you're in the top $60,000 or more percent, you're seeing a 3% reduction. That's what you're going to see. You're going to see roughly a 3% reduction. If you're in the top $500,000 or more bracket, you're only going to see a 1.1% reduction.
Yeah.
So if you just on base level, for somebody
good.
that's not looking at any numbers, you go, well, it's better to be in the middle class than it is the top percent. And this is not going to harm the middle class or the low class. This is not going to harm them because the top percent is only losing or only going to be saving 1.1%.
Mm-hmm.
But then I actually sat down and said, okay, well, what if we actually just looked at raw numbers, right? What if we looked at the raw numbers of this and seen how it affects? So if you make $60,000 of income under the old tax plan, you had to pay $15,000 versus Trump's plan of $13,500. Now that's base without deductions. If you include a standardized deduction, the first side of things, before we got into the GOP plan, you would only be paying $13,412 in deductions versus the Trump plan at $10,800. Now, you and I are going to go, that's pretty big. What's the difference between that is $2,612.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to tell you that's a small pittance, in my world. I don't think you would balk at making another $2,600 a year.
That's basically what my return was. I think my return was like $2,600 or so $2,200 last year for my tax rebate that I got. So that would be like getting two of them, which is a big deal in my game.
Yeah, and so that's not bad. That's not something we should balk at. That's something we should go, okay, hey, that's pretty good.
Sounds nice.
Right? That sounds nice. And that's what the GOP is banking on. That's the conversations that I've had to have with Trumpites, is what I'm going to call them tonight, to not try and swear. Trumpsters. Yeah. I like that word better. Now, let's go into the top percentile, right? So I'm not going to tell you that $500,000 or more is the 1 or 2% of Americans. That's where they land. We're going to go with 1%. We're going to be conservative. I'm going to be conservative here. That's the first time you probably heard me say that. And we're going to be conservative and say anybody that makes over $500,000 a year is in the 1 percentile of Americans, right? So if your salary is $500,000 under the old plan, your base initial income tax is $198,000. Under the Trump plan, it's now down to $192,000.
Yeah.
Now let's go ahead and add standard deductions in. Standard deductions would put us originally at $195,485. Under the Trump plan, it drops to $187,880. So now that becomes a deduction of $7,605 per person.
Okay.
Think about that. Now, in my world, $7,600 is a lot. Now, probably for somebody making $500,000 or more, they're going to look at you and say, well, that $7,600 is what $1,000 is to you. They're probably going to equate it differently.
That might be one house payment.
One house payment.
No,
Depends on what house you
work.
What house you live in.
That might be Well, that's like one house payment or something like along those lines. Like, but so basically, what we're looking at, and your estimation was almost perfectly spot on. Actually, the top 1% adjusted gross income at $465,000 after 2014. So rounding that up a little bit to 2017, you're probably right on the $500,000 mark. That is where the 1% starts in the United States.
Yes. Now, let's actually take population. So the total population as of November of this year was 326,020 people.
Okay.
That's what they say, right? You know, so again, we're taking base level numbers. We're not going to dig into extremely deep data because we don't need to be super finite, right? We don't need to have an exact number because we're just going to talk basic numbers. So let's look at this that way. That means 23% of that number are under 18 years old and can't vote. So that will leave us with 249,485,000 people left to tax.
Okay, so you're assuming that 18 and under, they're just not paying taxes.
Yeah, we're just going to say that. And again, I understand they do, but it is very complicated when you get into that because do your parents claim you? Do your parents not claim you? There's a lot of things that go into that.
It's limited, so it's easy just to clean them out, and that plus or minus for the rest of it. So we got
exactly
23% of the country has now been removed. We're at 250 million, just under. What are we going next?
Yeah. So now, if we look at this scenario of 60% of Americans earning less than $60,000 a year, that leaves us with 149,691,000 people earning less than $60,000 a year. So let's just put them all at $60,000 because it's a little easier to do it. This would equate to a loss of $300 billion a year. That's if we're looking at a $300 billion loss on people that earn less than $60,000 a year.
So the tax break for that 149 million people, they're essentially going to get a $300 billion tax break spread among those people.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, if we're sitting here and if you're in those shoes, you're going to go, holy crap. But it's kind of like if you remember how we talked about lawsuits, right, Hannah? And we talked about the difference between, a personal lawsuit and like a joint lawsuit that's, used as this large corporate type lawsuit against them. There's a huge difference in the income you get back from it. Yeah. But there's a difference in risk too, right? So in this scenario, there's $300 billion coming back. But again, you and I are only going to see 2,600 tops coming back to us.
Yeah, it says that on average for $300 billion tax revenue loss, which means that money's not going into the government. So that means it's getting distributed back to that 149 million people. That's approximately $2,000 a head. Exactly.
So let's look at the flip side of the coin, right? In the scenario of 1% of Americans earning more than $500,000 a year, we're talking a different quantity, right? We're only talking 2.5 million people essentially earn more than $500,000 a year. Okay. This loss equation with the 7,600 a head basically would equate to a $19 billion loss in the federal government from just the 1%. Now you're going to tell me, well, I mean, it's only 19%. It's only 19 billion. I mean, we're losing 300 billion from 60% of the nation, but the 1%, we're only going to lose 19 million. I'm telling you, if you looked at that ratio of loss, think about that. Think about this. 1% of the nation equates to 6% of lost income taxes to the federal government. That's insanity to me. That's huge, dude. When I sit here and actually look at the scope of things, 60% of our nation, affects 300 billion. 1% affects $19 billion. That's insanity to me. That's crazy.
A little different angle than what I usually like to concentrate on that 1%. I typically do. A little different look at this. So let's say that, fine, whatever, lump them all together. just on those two calculations that we've got there, we've got approximately $319 billion loss. I'm pretty sure that the United States Army Corps of Engineers has given our country a D in infrastructure everywhere. Bridges, don't drive a big truck over that because there's a good chance you might fall through that bridge. I mean, it's dangerous. We were looking at dams, all the flooding that happened in California and Texas, all these places. Like, well, we're not certain if this dam's going to break. We have to evacuate this entire city. Hundreds of thousands of people are in danger on a regular basis when it comes to all this infrastructure problems. Take $320 billion out of that mark. I mean, just for scale, the defense budget for last year was $650 billion. So take half of what we spend on war away. That's how big of a deal we're cutting. So imagine taking half the defense budget and just losing it. Like, we're talking about a country that needs to spend more money on infrastructure, and it needs to spend money on everything. All we hear about is our cities and the states and everybody not having enough money. We're going to slice $320 billion out of that mark. I don't care if it's just the 1% that takes most of it or if it's the 60%. We don't need a tax cut here, because that's a danger to, in my opinion, this kind of a tax cut in the country it's a danger to the overall health of the nation itself. Like, there needs to be some money spent.
Now, we're going to take a really quick commercial break, and I'm not going to tell you I agree with you, Hannah. I'm going to Hannah. I merged our names. We have celebrity names. Hannah.
We are not.
We are now Hannah. Anyway, I'm not going to tell you I agree with you, but I'm going to tell you that's a good point, right? We're losing all this money, but what are we going to gain from it? Where are we going to cut it? What are we going to do? But in reality, how does it compare to the rest of the world? We're going to take a really quick commercial break. We're going to tote our stuff, and when we come back, we're going to have more Cellar Door Skeptics. We'll be right back.
Hey, this is Keith.
And this is Jen, and we're from Not Another Atheist Podcast.
You're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics.
Join the revolution.
If you'd like to join the ranks of Patreons and sponsor the show, head over to patreon.com/Cellar Door Skeptics. For less than a 20-ounce soda or an energy drink each week, you can help sponsor us, the hosts, and our charity of choice. Patreon helps Cellar Door Skeptics create better content, become better activists, and it's going to help you stay healthier by drinking one less soda or one less energy drink each week. Click the link in the notes of the show to sponsor us today, because we bring the discussion with the sources.
Hello, I'm Miss B. Haven.
I'm Demanda Wright.
And we're
promoting secular feminism. And you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics.
Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Cellar Door Skeptics. Earlier we were talking about all the tax levels, how they've changed, how it affects you, standard income deductions, and how much the government's going to lose from these different ventures.
Real exciting stuff.
Real exciting stuff. I got super passionate. I threw a vase against the wall. I didn't do any of that. I could have. Okay, Hannah came over, gave me a shot of morphine, made sure that I calmed down a little bit. And then we came back to the show.
Just a fentanyl patch. I didn't give you a shot. I just put a fentanyl patch on you.
So let's talk a little bit about. We were talking about, your gains, your losses, family wise over the next year, right? But how do we extend it over the next 10 years? What does it mean? What does it look like? How do we analyze these things? So for somebody making less than $10,000 a year, you're going to see a $79 a year loss.
Yeah.
But if you escalate it up over 10 years, you're going to start seeing a slight increase every year to eventually 10 years, you're going to lose $530 a year versus, the original $79. So over 10 years, you go from 1% loss to a 10.5% loss. That's crazy. That's a huge escalation, right? We talk again about, people that make $500,000 or more. What do they save?
Yeah.
How much do they save? Is it really that big of a deal? But if you look at it, you're looking at, well, in reality for you and me, we probably go, well, okay, there's not a big difference between $100 and $500. I mean, there is, but there's not. In a year's time, $500 for me, if you took it and spread it over 52 weeks, that's $10, a little over $10 a week. That's not a lot of money for me. I piss $10 a week off, I'm sure, in eating tamales or Mexican food or something I decide to eat out on. I'm sure I'm spending $10 a month easily.
Yeah. But
if you look at that, though, the percentage difference is huge for somebody that makes that kind of money, right?
Yeah. $530 is approximately 5.3% of their total yearly income. So if someone makes $10,000, this is less than $10,000 group, but we'll just say they make the full $10,000. If you have to pay $530 in 10 years, that you're paying 5.3% of your total yearly income. Now, let's say that is the person who's making $1 million or over. If they had to pay 5.3% of their yearly income, they would owe another $53,000 at the end of the year. But that's not what's going to happen in this current plan. They won't have to pay any money at the end of that. How much are they going to owe for the $1 million guys?
Well, they're gonna gain $59,000 a year for the first year,
and then at the 10-year mark,
and at the 10-year mark, they only gain $9,000.
Okay, so they're still getting more money though. They're getting money back at the end of the year, but the poorest people in our country owe 5% of their yearly income. That's basically the weight that we're getting here.
Yes. Yep. And so when we look at that, when we look at the difference between that, we're looking at, okay, right now, for the next, let's say, 4 years, you're going to see a 2.89% to 2.72% increase or gain for those that are in the top 1%. And again, we just talked about how does that affect everything? How does that look at things? We talked about the $7,600 a year, and somebody making over $500,000 probably just looks at $7,600 and goes, yeah, that's a month or two of house payments. But that's a lot of money, right? And when we look at proportionate wise, we're seeing a difference. The top 1% see extra income for the first almost 8 years of over 2%. There is not one other category that sees over 2%. And again, I'm not going to balk at another $2,000 a year. I'm not going to balk at that. I'm going to say, okay, hey, thank you. Thank you for everything you're giving me. I will take the extra $2,000 and I'll reinvest it in my house. Because that's what I'll do. An extra $2,000. If I get an extra $2,000 this year, it allows me to buy a little bit nicer of a fence, or maybe finance part of my driveway that I'm going to be putting in. Which are all things that will stimulate the economy. But
car repairs or whatever. You're middle class, right? Yeah, you're middle class. The money when you get a tax break goes into the economy.
Yes.
When the people on the top 1%, they have nice cars, they have nice houses. They have all the pillows and blankets and toiletries and everything that they need. It's all covered. So what do they do with their tax money that they get back, or this savings that they get? They put it into investments. They put it into stocks and bonds, things that make them more money, and time goes on. They're not going to be stimulating the economy like you would, because you've got things to spend that money on.
Yes, they do not. And when we say, hey, it's only 2.89%, what do you care? What do you give a crap about 2.89%? Is that really that big of a deal? Should we really be arguing over a small pittance? But if you add it up and again you analyze it and you look at it on a larger scale, you can understand that 2.89% affects over 25% of the lost revenue to the government. That's huge. If it's 25% of the lost revenue, how can we sit here and equate the difference between the two? How can we sit here and go, oh, it's not a big deal? If you look at it on a macro level, you're going to understand that there's more money being depleted from the government by the 1% of the people than there is from 60% of the people, period. And that's just insanity to me. So, yeah, let's look at a tale of two incomes, which is essentially what we titled the show, because, again, it goes different depending on who you are, whether you're an heir or whether you're a doctor, whether you can invest in long-term capital gains, dividends. How you invest your money is different. So you're right, Hannah, you and me in the middle class or below the middle class. I don't even know if I'm middle class or not, to be honest with you, but,
we're both above the $53,000 they mentioned as the median income for the United States. So we're both in the middle class.
So barely, but so either which way. Okay, so when you look at that and you sit there and you go, okay, hey, this is where we're at, right? That $2,600 for you and I, even if we did invest it in stocks and bonds, for you and I, it's probably more beneficial actually to reinvest it in our house, because if we can pay our house off faster, we can resell it faster and gain more money on a quicker dividend. We're going to get larger dividends from reselling our house, from improving our house, than we're going to get from investing it in an IRA or, any sort of capital gains, investments.
You and I are gonna make more money as far as investing in real estate than we would in most markets, because you and I can't afford to invest in really risky markets that have really high rate of gains. Everything that I'm invested in as far as my IRA is all low risk, long term, retirement stuff, and it's not very much. I have less than $10,000 in retirement for my IRA right now, because I've basically been putting all my money in my house because my returns have been 15-20% more on that, and so as time goes on, that equity will be put into my IRA. But either way, this the Bloomberg article that is the comparison between these here is the scenario is, let's say there's two neighbors. One is an emergency room doctor, and the other is just a rich kid whose parents had a ton of money and their grandparents left it to them. So they both report $300,000 a year in their income to the Internal Revenue Service. So who pays more in taxes is the question here. So essentially this is inherited money versus wage money. If you work, you owe the IRS a lot more. It's $38,500 more. So assuming each of them pay their maximum with no special deductions or anything. So let's say they both take the standard deduction. The person who works is going to pay a lot more. The person who gets the inheritance, they're going to pay $24,000 less, because they don't have to pay payroll taxes that the person who works and their employer must fork over each year. So in the end, what it really comes down to is you have all of your taxes, and the federal income and the total tax burden is a better way to go. So the total tax burden that the doctor pays out of that $300 is approximately $104,000, or roughly 34% of their total income. But the heir, he only owes, or they only owe around $41,000, $42,000, or 14%. And so the rate there, if you work for your money, you owe more. If you inherit your money and its investments and qualified dividends, and essentially you are a Wall Street child, you get a special treatment from our government. The way our current economic system is set up, you get a better deal. And that is the issue that a lot of the people like Chris and I here have a problem with, is that I would think that it would be the other way around, because if I'm working for my money, I would think that the United States would appreciate my hard work in saying that, you're a good hardworking American. You're the guy that all the politicians love to say hardworking Americans deserve a better deal. But when it comes down to the actual capitalistic situation here, it seems to be inverted for us blue collar and lower white collar folks.
Exactly. When they talk about, divided dividends and long-term capital gains, if you claim less than 10 grand, you don't have to pay any percent of taxes on that. There's no money that you have to pay on that. Oh, wait.
Yeah.
And then it goes, well, if you make less than $37,000, you still don't pay any money on it. But if you and I were working for that money, we'd be paying we'd be in that 15 percentile tax bracket. That's insanity to me. That's, the first graph you presented was saying effectively my tax bracket, if I were a doctor making $300 grand a year, is 34%. If I'm the individual inheriting $300 grand a year because somebody wants to hide their money, or somebody wants to just give away their money because they don't know what to do with it, you're only paying 14% on that. Now, I'll be honest, if you were to go, hey, Chris, you can work for $300 grand a year and pay 34% on your income, or you can sit on your ass and you only have to pay 14%. What do you think we would do? To me, I would say, hey, if you don't have a job earning what you are getting in capital gains or dividends or any of that stuff, I would say your taxation should be twice what it would be for somebody who works. Because think about it this way. If you're working, you're benefiting the government. You're benefiting society. You're bringing new ideas. You're inputting things into the machine. Whether we agree with the capitalistic garbage that comes out of this or not, at least if you're inputting money and effort, you're going to enhance society in some way, shape, or form. If you're sitting on your ass consuming, why should you get more fucking money? I'm sorry. Like, I just don't understand the logic behind that. And this new tax plan goes above and beyond that. That's where, people get enraged. And then they're like, well, Chris, why are you upset? Because you're going to get more money back. That fucking asshole from that we interviewed that one time, the Trump supporter that was in the Trump campaign. I can't remember. Nathan. Yeah. He was rallying against people, anybody that was like, well, why would you want more money? He's like, look, you're going to gain $2,000 to $4,000 more a year plus your child tax credit, Chris. So what are you complaining about? And I'm sitting here going, because the guy sitting on his ass has to pay less fucking money than me, who has to go to work 60 hours a week. Now you tell me why the fuck I should have to go stress out at 60 hours a week when that dude gets to snort coke and fuck strippers or do whatever the hell he does and pay less taxes. It's illogical to me.
Explicit tag warning for young children. No, in the end, for me, really, it's the flip. So the people who are making this legislation, people who are involved in a lot of lobbying, and people that are doing this stuff, they're going to be people who have large inheritances. They're going to be people who are not busy 60 hours a week like you and I. Like, I can't go protest. I'm too busy. I really cannot do it. I try as hard as I can. I'm working 72 hours at least a week right now. And so, crazy. I mean, well, that too. In the small business world, and for some reason, I actually believe in the American dream of if you work hard enough, you can actually have nice things. But in the end, what we really have here is, the people who have time and money are able to go and play the games at the top of the scale, and they can say, listen, we want a lower tax bracket. We're going to donate to your campaign. Help us out. And you get a tax plan like this where the people who are working hard, they may be getting a ton of money, like $300,000 a year doctor. That's a pretty good lifestyle. I'm going to say that's a pretty good lifestyle. But he's working for his money. He's a doctor. He deserves, a well, paid salary. But why does he deserve to pay, double what the inheritance, the heir, is getting? So, like, to me, it should be the other way around. It really should be flipped. Like, if you are not working for it, you should not have the incentive. There should be an incentive to be a worker. There should be an incentive to be someone who innovates, who is an entrepreneur, who is a business creator, a job creator. I mean, that's how you get wages, right? If you have no wage income, or if you're just getting money from capital gains and stuff like that, like, you're not really doing anything. You're moving money around in the virtual market, but you're not doing something. And so, like, when it comes to bring manufacturing back, are those rich people starting new businesses or something like that? Not so much. Are they starting new manufacturing corporations? Probably not, because that would start getting into that actual wage area where they would have to pay more in taxes. So, like, there's all kinds of things that people do to stay out. So whatever the best way they can keep the most amount of money in their pocket, that's what they're going to do. So if we make an incentive for someone to be an innovator, to be an entrepreneur, be a business creator, like working, getting a wage hour like that, then that would be a benefit to our society, I would think, and it would help bring some of that money away from the people who just that all their job is just to sit there and make money, like Mitt Romney and stuff like that. So exactly. I don't know.
Think about it this way too. If your tax burden as a doctor is $104,000 a year, and your tax burden for somebody that has the exact same income is $42,000 a year, what's that? What? That's a $62,000 a year savings. Now, if I had an extra $62,000 a year, I could invest it in other things, whatever I wanted to. I could do a lot of coke too, or I could invest it. And so when we look at these things and we sit there and we talk about, where do people go? Well, when you're richer, you have more extra money to invest. And the logic behind the GOP plan is they're saying, well, let's give these extra people more money to invest. And they're going to reinvest in the economy. Yeah. they're going to reinvest
Trickle
in the
down.
economy. It's trickle down cocksucking economics. They're going to sit there and say, hey, the more money we buy into this, or the more money we give into this, the more that's going to come back to the economy and the more money will come back to us. And if that was logical and true, I would support it. If the hedge fund trustee billionaire kid is like, well, I'm going to have that extra money and I'm going to reinvest in the economy. I'm going to pay somebody to come clean my underwear every day, and they're going to make 60 grand a year doing nothing but cleaning my underwear. Well, I can't fault him for doing that. If he took that 60 grand and reinvested it in something other than his own wealth, I'd be okay with it. But when he turns around and when you're that rich and you have the ability to take that extra $64,000 a year, or $62,000, a year, and reinvest it in the economy, you're now moving yourself from the bottom 10% of people like you and I who can't afford that shit to invest in the economy to over 40%. You're going to be in the top over 40% being able to reinvest that money. When you have that much extra money, you can reinvest it. And the question is, how do you reinvest it? Where does it go? What does it do? How does it benefit the economy? And then that's one of the largest criticisms of this tax plan here, is that we're going to give all this money back to corporations. Are we going to see anything? And we're going to take a quick commercial break here. We have to take another break. But when we come back, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of look at, how do we compare with the rest of the world? Because in all fairness, Hannah, where I'm at right now is I'm saying, hey, we're going to give this large break to these people. Where does the trickle down come back from? Well, if they cut corporate tax, it's at 15% tax rate. Is corporations going to take 15% and reinvest in its employees? Is the hedge fund kid who's taking 20% less than a doctor going to reinvest in the economy? I don't know. We'll be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics.
This is Deborah McTaggart from Beyond the Trailer Park, and you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics.
Looking for something new and exciting, or maybe just a change from the old Atheist Show format? Cellar Door Skeptics podcast provides listeners with hours of enjoyment each week on Spreaker and iTunes. Check us out as we talk politics, religion, science, reviews of books and music, along with the occasional interview just for a twist. Join Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern as they bring fresh content to you. Walk with us through the cellar door as we help you prepare for the revolution. You can find us on Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, and even on Facebook.
Hey, what's up? I'm Steve Hayes.
And I'm Dave Curry.
And we're from Prophetcast.
And you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics.
On the Fox News Network.
They're not affiliated with Fox.
Everyone's a Fox affiliate.
Now, back to the show.
And welcome back to Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you all so much for sticking around through those amazing first two fucking segments. And now that we've violated the explicit tag, I might as well just throw the fuck words out there. It's just
Is violated? Is violated the right word, or should we just be calling it a Roy Moore? We just Roy Moore.
No. I didn't Roy Moore anything. It was consensual, and it was not underage. I highly doubt there's any underage people that listen to the show. Stop trying to poison our show, Hannah. Don't be the Jared of Subways of the show. Like I don't need a Jared of Subway joining our show.
No, we just wanted to make sure that all of our listeners, this is all consensual. They saw the warning, because it's going to be up there right as soon as they click on it now, right?
Oh yeah, there'll be an explicit tag all over this. Anyway. So we're talking about tax rates, and we were talking about personal income tax rates. And when we talk about this, we analyze the fact that the 1% of America will get a 1.1% reduction, which equals to $7,600 per person. Therefore, it's $19 billion of the budget loss. But then I said, okay, hold on. When I was doing the research, in all fairness, I was looking at corporate tax rates, right? Our corporate tax rate is over 10% more than the worldwide average. We are high for our corporate tax rate. So I said, okay, if we're going to be fair here, and we're going to be fair and look at where we're at, how our income tax stand, and we're going to actually just talk about income tax here. How do we compare with the world income tax wise for the top 1%? We'll just start there because that's the easiest way to show us. So there is a KPM.
We're gonna compare the top 1% of all these countries. Is that what
to
you're
begin
saying?
with? Yes, to begin with, that's where we're going to start. So we're going to start by looking at what is our tax bracket rates for the top 1% of the nation compared to other nations. Because again, in all fairness, if our corporate tax rate is over 20% more than everybody else, we have to be fair and say if our income tax rate is more than 20% over everybody else, should we not have that honest discussion that says we are higher taxed than other first world nations? Because corporate-wise, it is like that. So why not look at personally, is it the same way?
We've heard Trump say that we are the highest tax nation in the world. He keeps saying that we have the highest corporate tax rates, the highest personal tax rates for the richest people in the country, or whatever. He said that many times. So, is it true? Basically,
well, from the research that I've done, Mr. Hanna, it is not actually. So I pulled a whole bunch of different numbers. There's a lot of numbers we're going to go over, but we're going to just start with a KPMG analysis, right? And we're going to do that because out of everything I looked at, KPMG's individual income tax table provides an individual income tax rate around the world. It seems to be one of the most accepted analysis, that's a stupid word. Analyses of where your personal income tax brackets stand. So
that's part of this special Cellar Door Skeptics Tanner vocabulary entrance analysis.
And so what do we look at? So right now we're at 39.6%. They're looking at lowering it to 38.5. Again, when we talked about it's a 1.1% tax difference. So I said, well, if we're the highest, just like we are corporate tax-wise, maybe that's a fair analysis. Maybe that's a fair thing we should do. Maybe that's something we should actually consider to do, throughout the world. So then I said, let's look at the United Kingdom first, because to me, that's the first area I would look to, only because I really like, Great Britain comedy. I love Monty Python and the Holy Grail, as we talked about earlier. I love all these different things. So I said, in the United Kingdom, what's the highest tax bracket that they can have?
Well, I was just going to say the U.S. they call it a special relationship with the UK too. So,
all right, that sounds a little weird and
that's what they call it.
Problematic, but
Theresa May basically called Donald Trump out recently, and everybody's like, "Oh no, is a special relationship between the United States and the UK in danger?" So, but what is their tax rate for their 1%?
45%.
Dios mío.
45%. So we're at 39.6 and they're at 45. That's over 5% difference just with the UK. Now, let's look at other countries, Hannah. Let's actually analyze and compare ourselves to other countries. In Sweden, they're 57% right now.
Ooh,
Germany is 47.5%. Switzerland comes in very close at 40%. China, guess what China is?
Well, I can see it, so there's no point in me guessing.
Way to ruin the analysis there. China is 45%. They're over 5% higher than we are in China. Australia, same thing, 45%. Mexico comes in lower at 35%. And Canada, out of all the major world countries I looked at, Canada came in at the lowest at 33%.
That one surprises me.
One
of the things we hear a lot about with Canada, they have the universal health care. They have a much more socially conscious and social program-based country. I really thought that rate would be a lot higher. So my assumption is that they, with that 33%, that lower personal income tax rate, that they have a higher corporate tax rate to kind of offset some of those the lower income from those individual rates. So just the only surprise out of that entire setup, because Mexico, I expected to be lower. Mexico is known for having low taxes and kind of being this tax haven. Further down you go throughout Central America, it gets even cheaper basically to have your primary source of residence at those locations, so the rate goes down. And then, but I mean, Switzerland, Germany, these are some of the places that have the best quality of life. Sweden is known as the happiest country in the world, and they have way higher tax rates. And so they have all of these social programs that help take care of all of their people, and they have really high tax rates. So, I mean, something's going right there. One of the things I will say, when it comes to comparison on most of these places, a lot of these countries are a little bit different than the United States in the fact that they are much more homogenous. They're very isolated as far as the diversity of their countries. There's not a whole lot. The United Kingdom has a lot more diversity than it used to, and that's something that I would give them credit for. They've seen a lot of influx from a lot of refugees and stuff, and Germany also is seeing some of that change right now. But the United States is known essentially from its starting point as a melting pot of all kinds of different diversity and groups. So maybe that changes a little bit as far as how things work here. But in all reality, it's a real surprise to see everybody, these countries having a much higher tax rate than the United States, but being okay with it.
Exactly, and that's the biggest thing here, right? When we look at these numbers, Canada's the anomaly. They're the largest anomaly, and I'll be honest, maybe we should dedicate a show to analyzing that and why. For tonight, we're not going to do that. I'm just going to accept that it's lower. We're going to accept the fact that they're better at managing their money than we are right now. And let's just move on from there, because it's not worth a whole episode at midnight to try and analyze all these random crazy thoughts that you and I have.
Well, maybe we need to look a little bit closer into America's little brother, Canada, our little brother to the north, our little sister, our little sibling to the north, because they do have some interesting stuff. We may even be able to get my aunt on the show, who was a Canadian citizen, I believe, up until the last couple of years, and my grandmother with 50 years in the United States, but she never gave up her Canadian citizenship. So I have some family that are very pro-Canada. We can see if they really like that healthcare plan or not. We'll see if we can work that out.
And I would agree, if your relatives wanted to come on, I would enjoy that conversation.
It'd be cool. It
would, yeah. But for tonight,
like I said, I mean, we did the Thanksgiving thing. The family's pretty comfortable. They're pretty cool. I don't know. We'll see if we could keep you from not yelling at my grandma.
Well, that's probably not going to happen. Like, I don't know what you think you're going to get out of this, but
no, we're not going to pull grandma into this. We might pull my aunt into it if she'd be willing to give it a shot. But grandma, I'm not going to subject grandma to Cellar Door Skeptics. I'm just not going to do that. So Canada, where are we at? Where are we at after Canada?
Well, I didn't go any deeper into where the nations were at. I just picked some top nations, and I'm saying is we don't have the top 1% rate that others do. There's a few anomalies, but technically speaking, everybody is bigger than us than Mexico and Canada.
Just in that short list. I mean, yeah, in that short list that you had. So, like, I'm going to guess, like, African countries and Central American countries, they're probably not going to be as high, or it's going to be variable. But
there is some of them that it's a variable thing. There's some of them that are, and there's some of them that aren't. More of them that aren't. And we could get into that, but now we're getting into larger world politics, and I'm saying if we're going to compare apples to apples, let's look at other large first world nations similar to us, have the same structure, the same democracy type thing outside China, and we can actually analyze this. Yes,
yeah, they got to be the industrialized nations that are part of the modern economy. Blah blah blah. So basically that's what we're talking on there. So the United States is not the top of that relatively short list, like we've heard a bunch of people say. So where are we going from there?
So then I kind of went and I looked at what's the difference between individual tax, mins and maxes, and corporate tax. And again, I don't want to get real heavy into the corporate tax because that's not the focus of tonight. But with the corporate tax, and we look at these different analyses, right? And we can sit there and say, the United Kingdom has a 19% corporate tax versus America, which has over 35%. That's a huge difference, right?
Yeah.
But when you look at individualized taxes, they're saying we're at 45% versus your 39% for the high end. And that's the same thing. When we talk about Canada, Canada has a lower income tax ratio, but a higher corporate tax ratio. Now, they're still not at where we're at. They're still only hitting a 31% or so, maybe 35% tops, whereas we hit 35% minimum for corporate tax. And so there's a difference there. Their corporate tax is lower, but it's higher than every other nation. Again, we're sometimes over 20% higher than some of these other nations.
Which puts us at kind of sort of a little bit of a detriment to in comparing with the rest of the the globalization, the globalized economy.
Yes, exactly. And so when we talk about the 1%, the majority of the 1% or own larger corporations and these other things, and corporate tax rates come into it. So then I said, okay, hey, so fine. How do we even this out? How do we come to a level playing field where we can actually have a legitimate conversation across all boundaries? And I found an article from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago called Chicago Fed, if you want. They are one of 12 regional reserve banks that, along with the Board of Governors in Washington, D.C., make up the nation's central bank. The Chicago Reserve Bank services different federal districts in Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, Lower Michigan, and Iowa. So this is one of 7. They actually ran an analysis on what the tax burden is between us and Germany. So again, if we're going to relate this back to what we've been talking about, and we're talking about where our income tax rates are, where all these other things are, this organization actually compared rates between Americans and Germany. And they did this for reasons to talk about minimum wage, price floors, market distribution, or market distortion with subsidies, welfare payments, and to see how do we fit in with Germany in terms of what they pay for taxes, for lower wages, and how everything fits together. Okay. So if we look at tax incident or tax burden, it's considered what's called the analysis of the effect of a particular tax on the distribution of the economic wealth. So they use this as an example. They say tax theory has a number of practical results. You can look at it one way. If you were to analyze Social Security taxes or Social Security payroll taxes inside the U.S., they are paid by half the employees and half by the employer. However, economists think that the worker bears almost the entire burden of the tax because the employer gets to pass that tax on through lower wages, thus forcing the employee to have the larger burden in this environment. Okay. Now, you could reverse that though, Hannah. You could reverse it and say equally, you could say the incident or the burden of the taxes fall on the employer because the price elasticity of the demand or the price elasticity of the supply affect the burden of how the taxes fall. Price controls such as minimum wage, again, price floor, market distribution, subsidies, welfare payments are all part of the analysis of how it could affect the corporation more than it could affect the employee. So you could kind of go both ways with where a tax burden would lie.
So basically what we're talking about, though, is essentially the minimum wages, the restrictions, the market controls. Because we always talk about these things on our show here is that whenever we love regulation, right? Like we're both, socialist light, if not socialist pro. And, market regulations is something that we see as a general benefit. And so essentially what we're saying here is that the corporation is going to feel those regulations. They're going to feel it pretty hard. And then on top of that, also the employee is going to feel an unregulated scenario, because if the corporation isn't regulated hard enough, they're going to just distribute those costs of the taxation onto the employees, much like we've heard in the past when they talk about fuel taxes or cigarette taxes, alcohol taxes, or whatever. The companies that make these products aren't going to directly pay these taxes. All they do is increase the price of what they're doing to the consumer. So like we hear about, there was a discount, or it was cheaper for diesel shipping in Michigan for a long period of time. It was cheaper for diesel fuel. And so there was a bunch of people that were petitioning to increase the taxation on diesel fuel because that was part of the trucking distribution market. Well, all the trucking companies did when a higher tax rate hit them was the cost of shipping just went up. So that money, that taxation just was immediately distributed into the consumer. This is the same kind of situation, is that the employee would be feeling that same kind of tax increase and the company itself is going to be immune to that. But then if you add all the wages, or add all the regulation to the wages, to the price floor, the market distortions and everything, that's going to basically make the company feel those pains. And that's kind of something that we need to really have here. It's like the company should feel some of the weight of distributing the wealth properly. Like I actually don't think this is in most cases, like I would think corporate sector would think this is a bad thing, but I don't think this is a terribly bad thing on that second end when the corporations are like, man, this is all this stuff we got to pay for.
I don't know. So, but when we look at tax burden, we look at both sides of this, and that's what the study looked at. So the Federal Reserve of Chicago actually looked at this, and they did a big analysis between America and Germany, and they talk about where the tax burden lies. They actually say that America is 10% lower than Germany in our tax burden. Even if we have a higher corporate tax, we're still lower in our burden than we are through corporates. And so, earlier you and I kind of talked about how you can avoid paying taxes, through trust fund babies. We talked about that. And that's kind of the same thing here. When we look at where does your tax burden lie, America has a lower tax burden than Germany does. That's what the whole point of this analysis was, is to say, hey, does America really genuinely have a lesser tax burden? And are the GOP fooling us? And I'll just be blunt here, I guess. Is the GOP fooling us that we're paying too much in taxes? Because according to this analysis and this study, we're not fucking paying more money in taxes. We're actually paying less fucking money, and our tax burden is over 10% less than what it is in another industrialized nation. Now, we don't know how this analyzes with every other first world country. We just took Germany and went that route.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So basically, this is just with Germany. Germany is known for having really high regulations and things like that. So like taxes and minimum wage are very high in that country. So we could probably do some blending or whatever. But in the end, they're talking about, is it 10% lesser in United States versus Germany. This is an important comparison because most of the claims that are being made by our administration then obviously are not based on fact. They're based on rumor, or they're based on intuition, or opinion. Well, the most important thing when it comes to doing something like economy, tax analysis, science, whatever version of it you're going through, is like the numbers that are absolute you start from, and then everything else we kind of work our way back and forth as far as opinion is concerned. These numbers that we're talking about here, that Germany is not, or the U.S. is paying less of a tax burden than Germany is. This isn't something that's like, well, my opinion is Germany is paying more. These are just raw numbers.
Exactly.
There's no like alternative fact here.
There's no fake news here. But yeah, if you look at the OECD, the average, right? If you look at the average, we're well below the average. We're on the very low end of the average. the Germany is over average, which is why you see a 10% discrepancy. You know, between us and France or us and Denmark, there's a huge difference. There's over 20% difference between that. And so when we look at those things and we actually analyze that, and if I were to say just on a high level, on a macro level, our corporate tax is 20% higher than every other nation, but yet our income tax is lower, and therefore we are extremely lower in our actual tax burden. So now, if we were to say, hey, we're going to lower income tax and we're going to lower corporate tax, we're now going to move us on that tax burden scale well below Mexico. We're going to be like on the low end of this, because in the long run of things, corporate tax is not what's accumulating to the tax burden. Just because we're paying 20% more in corporate tax does not mean it's affecting our tax burden in the same way, which tells me that income tax, trustee babies, those are the things that are affecting our tax burden more than corporate tax rates. So for the Republicans to walk in and say, hey, guess what the fuck we're going to do? We're going to come in and we're going to slash corporate taxes by 20% to put us at the national average, and we're going to slash income taxes. I'm saying is, hey, we should be raising income taxes, especially on the rich and the middle class, and lowering them on the lower class because it's less of an impact, because we want to move our tax burden closer to the average rather than being under average. And a lot of people are going to say, well, Chris, I would rather be under average. I'd rather be on that lower end. I'd rather have more money. But what does that mean? What does that do for a GDP? And that's where the tax burden comes into this whole thing. Our wages are over 10% lower than Germany because of our tax burden. That's how that works. So we want to pay people less. We tax them less. Therefore, we're on the lower end of that scale.
Yeah, the wage difference that I was talking about, Germany they pay their employees very, very highly. Like, I mean, they are known. In the field that I work in engineering, I do work. One of my three major customers is a German corporation, Robert Bosch Germany. They are a state-owned corporation. It's a pretty interesting thing to deal with. Basically, the country owns the corporation, and they pay their employees very well. And it's one of the things. But they also training and staying on top of technology and increasing and stuff like that. All those things are funded because they have a really high tax burden. I mean, that burden comes back. It's like an investment. So like what we talked about last week when we said that if you make an investment in certain areas of healthcare and certain areas of education, that you get a return on your investment of like every dollar that you invest, you get $1.70 back. The same kind of thing happens in some of these countries that have a higher tax burden, is that higher tax is putting into an investment in their people. They get better infrastructure. They have people that are better trained. Colleges are better funded. College tuition is lower. And so all of those investments, the taxes themselves, that burden we talk about, it isn't really a burden on the people. It actually turns out to be an investment in the people, and they get a higher payout, and they have a better, they have a better natural economy, and so they don't have as bad of a distribution of wealth or an inequality distribution like what we have. And so these are the kind of things we could look to those countries to maybe take a few of what they've done and distribute them throughout our capitalist society and bring things back to when we really had a good distribution of wealth. I would really think that this tax bill, everything that we've shown here, and all of the things that they want to do with our tax bill, because once again, none of this has actually been passed. It has to go back through reconciliation, and then we will be looking at the actual bill. But we'll see what happens here.
Exactly, and you're 100% right, Hannah. You're 100% right. Like, where do we go from here? We could talk about how do we invest in our nation, and if investing in our nation means we move our tax burden closer to the average, why is that a bad thing? Why are we watching the GOP creating a fucking bill that's going to take our tax burden and lower it? So great, we have a lower tax burden, we have a lower consumption rate, we have a lower investment in our own people. Where the fuck do you think that's going to leave us as a first world nation in the next 20 years? It's going to take us and move us out of a power. It's going to take us to say, hey, other nations, why don't you step in and do what the United States is not doing? We are not the leading nation. Therefore, we should be moving our tax burden closer to the nations that are leading the world in economics and sales and in revolution. And for those of you who want to sit there and say, I'd rather have a little bit of extra dollars in my pocket, I'm sorry. I disagree with you. Take a few extra fucking dollars out of my pocket, invest in the future, and make it so that the world can benefit from the humanity standing the United States has. Thank you all. Have a good night, and see you next week with another Cellar Door Skeptics.
You've been listening to a presentation of Cellar Door Skeptics. Check us out on Spreaker, cellardoorskeptics.com.